think it's a category that the press is dubbed. It's an easy class to put a bunch of bands in a category, to be like, oh, they're emo.
Okay.
You know, let's put them in this pie section. You know, they're not hardcore, they're not metalcore, they're not fucking emo, they're not fucking whatever. It's like, that. I was pissed when I was a kid too. I guess I was an emo kid when I was 15. You know, punching walls and fucking crying about stupid shit. But you grow up, you figure it out.
Nothing says the mid-2000s quite like the Vans Warped Tour. The smell of sunscreen, BO, and hairspray filling the air, all while grown men whine about their high school love on stage to a massive crowd of mall goths, emos, punk wannabes, and hipsters. Now, all jokes aside, the post-hardcore wave of the 2000s was a fantastic time for music. While many at the time would write these bands off as being gimmicky or something that only losers listened to, and in the initial years after it all ended, a lot of people would just kind of look at it as a whole scene of cringy and lame people. But the truth is the era was magical, and just like everything else that is looked at as a lame fad for its time, give it a handful of years, if not a decade, and it will become cool again. As the world has gotten ever more cold and unforgiving, collectively, a lot of us are starting to look back at these old days with blind nostalgia and pride. And while the youth of today sees it all as an era they wish they could have been around for, and the whole thing gets reappraised as a renaissance of creativity and great music, much the same way grunge, nu metal, and new wave have all gotten their own kind of treatments like this, well, with emo or scene or whatever you want to call it, it's now finally getting the flowers that it mostly deserves. But more so than most genres, the whole emo mall goth wave really did have some underloved gems in there. You had bands like From First to Last, Circus Survive, and of course, today's subjects, Aiden. Aiden is probably one of the most underloved bands from this era. They were once a pretty big deal and one of the frontrunners of their scene, only to later be disgraced due to their drop in quality with their later records, which were dodgily put out as fast as possible to end a very predatory contract they had with the notoriously scummy label Victory Records. But their legacy was also cut due to the predatory allegations thrust upon singer Will Francis in the late 2010s. And in the years since, has routinely done what he could to refute the allegations. But look, that is an entire story and can of worms that we're not going to be delving into here. As that whole thing comes with a lot of context, refutations from multiple parties, receipts from multiple parties, legal issues, and just so much more that it's something best talked about on its own due to the serious and very delicate nature of the situation, as well as it's something that I just personally don't find appropriate to broach in a video like this one. But with that being said, regardless of any sort of past controversies, I do think it's important to talk about Aiden because not only are they a forgotten band, but they're one that really deserves their flowers, even if their discography is admittedly a bit rocky and they have a checkered past. Aiden brought a lot of innovation and evolutions to the scene that no one else was doing during their time, and it's because of this that we can easily say that Aiden is one of those bands that, if they weren't around, the scene wouldn't exist the way it does today, or at least until it did, till it died off. And also, admittedly here, I'm pretty biased. Aiden was one of those bands that I grew up with as a scene hipster, getting into them after their initial hiatus had started and delving deep into their discography and falling deeply in love with the special and one-of-a-kind sound that they played with. In many ways, they were one of the first artists that really led me into the goth subculture. and trained my ears to be receptive to softer and more emotional music like that of The Cure and even Depeche Mode. And that's all thanks to the record we're going to cover today. Their album, Conviction. Even in a hidden gem of a band like Aiden lies an even deeper hidden gem of an album. And that's because out of all their records, it's the black sheep of the bunch. A strange step away from their core sound into a completely new and almost unrecognizable direction in the middle of their career. Despite the fact that it was a fantastic album on its own merits, it was drowned in lackluster fan response due to the fact that it was much too different from their horror punk roots. And despite this, it's my favorite, arguably their best aged work. So hey, why don't we stop wasting our time and just jump right into it? Welcome to Hidden Gems. Now let's talk about Conviction.
Hey everybody, it's Will from Aiden. You're about to watch barebonesmusic.com.
Now, before we dive headfirst into Conviction, we need to establish what made it so special in the first place. And that will require us to get familiar with who Aiden was in their beginnings. Like I mentioned before, Aiden was a major player in the early 2000s post-hardcore scene. And like many of those early wave bands, they didn't sound conventional to what many would now recognize as post-hardcore. These days, when the term is brought up, you might think of the poppy bands from the Warped Tour scene, like Pierce the Veil and maybe Sleeping with Sirens. Or even the 2000s legends who paved the path, like Seosin or even Underoath. But the more you dig into the early 2000s bands that would come to soundtrack the mall goth wave, the more muddy the waters really get. And this is where we get the eclectic mixture of artists who fell into the general post-hardcore ethos, and Aiden happened to be one of these bands. A general misconception about early 2000s post-hardcore is that all these bands were from the overall punk scene, and while some of them were adjacent to it, a lot of this wave was spawned from late 90s emo, pop punk, as well as alternative rock that was kind of itching into that more alternative sort of wave at the time. Aiden differs here as they were pretty directly from the punk scene, something that's heard extremely apparently with their first two records, Our Gang Stark Oath and Nightmare Anatomy. Unlike many of the more contemporary sounding bands of this era, these records were much heavier and much more hardcore influenced than the others. Our Gang's Dark Oath set a standard for the Aiden sound, taking a lot of the contemporary melodic song structures and, for lack of a better term, emo sound, and fusing it with horror punk and hardcore music. Essentially, the best way to describe why they were different instead of just hearing the music was that they were a post-hardcore band that eschewed the influence of At the Drive-In and Sunny Day Real Estate, and instead took major influence from artists like The Misfits, The Damned, and probably most importantly, AFI. And these days, it might sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but this distinction in sound and direction couldn't be more important. Keep in mind, the staple post-hardcore sound of the era sounded a lot more like this. And in some of the more experimental bands where they would take more indie influence, like this. So a band like Aiden coming onto the scene with their much darker, much more goth-influenced look and direct and front-facing punk sound really separated them from the pack. And this was something they had doubled down on with their second record, Nightmare Anatomy.
So now midnight again, you're all alone.
Now, if you do know who Aiden is, it's probably because of this album. Nightmare Anatomy was the band's biggest record and most influential, putting them on the map and landing them spots at Warped Tour and paving a way to success for them. It's not a very different record from its predecessor, but rather it takes a lot of the ideas from Our Gang's Dark Oath and refines and matures them into something much better than its predecessor. Seeing the band continue to double down on the goth aesthetic and bring even more of that horror punk influence to their initial sound. But as this album would come to define the band's tone and core image, it would also be where the success they saw would lead to the band, and more specifically their singer, Will Francis, beginning to yearn for a shift, and to do something more than just coast on their punk rock background. And that's where the seeds to what would end up becoming Conviction would be sown.
Here with the guys from Aiden. Okay, so your record, I think you invented the name, no?
Yeah, we were writing the record in pre-production, and we needed a name for the record, so we were just like throwing out some words, and then I just said Nightmare Anatomy, and everybody liked it. So, and it kind of goes with like the theme of the record, so it's pretty good.
A year after the release of Nightmare Anatomy, Aiden would throw out a short EP entitled Rain in Hell. And not only would this record contain their best album art, it would also be the home of one of their most famous and well-known songs, We Sleep Forever. This song would be featured in the movie Dead Silence, otherwise known as that really shitty puppet horror movie from the guys who made Saw. And while on the surface, We Sleep Forever and Rain in Hell as a whole would just sound like a slightly softer Aiden project, it was the root from which Conviction would grow from. Rain in Hell not only saw the band soften their sound and bring much more melodic influences to it, but it would also have some 80s covers on it, like some from Billy Idol and the Misfits. And while those aren't the most goth artists to cover, it did show that the band was beginning to reach back into the 80s for influence and inspiration, something not a lot of people would seem to catch on to. And they should have, because it indicated a massive shift within the group and the direction that they were headed on as a band. In many ways, Aiden was one of the first groups from the scene to attempt the now common trend of shutting off your harsher elements and cult appeal and reinventing your image and sound to be much more mainstream acceptable and embrace a poppier sound. Now, to better explain this, let's draw a parallel to a much bigger band who successfully pulled this off almost a decade later, and that would be Bring Me the Horizon. Bring Me the Horizon did this by putting out Sempiternal, which was much more of a softer take on their core sound from before. It was still living within that metalcore, not really deathcore by this point, but the heavier bubble that they were from, but it brought in a lot more pop elements, it normalized clean vocals for the band, and overall was a big shift, but not so big that it would alienate their core fan base. And then they followed up Sempiternal with their album That's the Spirit, which was their full jump into that more mainstream, arena rock inspired sound that the band is known for today. And again, this is a pretty famous example, so I'm sure I don't need to go in depth on this. And well, this is what Aiden was essentially doing with Rain in Hell. It was their Sempiternal, and Conviction would be their That's the Spirit. Though, not to sound overly cynical, I do think that this was a much less calculated endeavor on Aiden's part. Not to say that Bring Me the Horizon didn't want to naturally move in that direction, but From what Ollie Sykes and other members have said over the years, it's obvious that their jump was a calculated and precise decision, whereas with Aiden and Will, it was a bit more spontaneous and out of a natural writing inclination after finding success. Every record that we've done, being the main songwriter for the band, has been a reflection of what's going on in my personal life. So yeah, Nightmare was pissed, but by the time we did Conviction, I'd achieved so many things that I've always dreamed of doing. Walking out on the main stage of Warped Tour, playing all summer long with NoFX, touring with him, played Download in front of 50,000 people. With Conviction, I wasn't pissed, I wasn't angry, and that came through in the music. I was a bit bummed that some Aiden fans turned away from it because I was a little bit more melodic or a little bit different from the way they had been expecting us, but I don't sit down and think, if I write this, it will sell bucket loads, because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night thinking that way. This snippet came from an interview that Will Francis did after the album had come out, and as he hinted, people weren't really sold on Aiden's new direction, despite it being the natural step forward for him and the band after the previous two records. But to the fans' defense, it's easy to see just why they might have had such a negative response, since Conviction, from the word go, instantly separates itself from the work the band had previously put out.
Close your eyes, the rain won't wash away. Close your eyes, the rain won't wash away.
The album opens up with a somber piano track, where Will sings a melancholic poem of longing love. And while it's vaguely sad and a bit generic, it's simply the lead-in to the first real track off the album, She Will Love You. As I said, the contrasts with these new songs are instantly apparent. There are no heavy guitars or biting and horror-esque lyrics. Instead, we're given a soft rock track, with the guitarists doing their best Robert Smith impression, and Will's vocals being the softest and cleanest we had ever heard him up to this point. And to add on to this, even the lyrics continue this contrast. Rather than being aggressive and horror-focused, or about trials of addiction and triumph like much of the band's previous work, here it's a sweet-sounding love song laced with bitterness underneath it all. Everything trashed and picturesque, so perfectly aligned. Will you come to me? Will you come to me? Kiss me quick, I'm losing. Why can't we live forever? The most interesting aspect at play here is that despite the change in tone, Aiden still continues to keep their dark lyrics and aspects up. Just like I said, the aggression is absolutely toned down, and more bitter and poison-laced lyrics of love and longing are here in its place. This track is about a rotted relationship built on dysfunction and lies, but sung and portrayed with hopeless romanticism and genuine desire. It's a dichotomy, and that's a word that we're going to become very familiar with as the record goes on. While not all the tracks on this album fall into this theme, one of its most reoccurring motifs is the constant theme of dichotomy. Whether it be the lyrics going in and out and playing on this, or it's the music itself being a contrast to the words they are paired with. The third track on the album follows this as well.
We found this one long kiss. The shadows stay forever and we're safe tonight. I'm falling to the ending. Dance with me.
Teenage Queen is a song that sounds and feels triumphant yet insecure. And the lyrics bounce back and forth between the perspective of an observer and a participant. From the observer angle, it talks about young love between a boy and a girl, but rather than focusing specifically on just their relationship, it also references something called the void, as well as self-harm and self-loathing. But it's all done in this almost jovial way. At least that's the way that the song feels like when you listen to it, and the way that Will sings it. And this spirit or this observer or person who's watching it all is really giddy and excited to see this communion of two young lovers. The chorus, and this may just be the case of it being a hook, but if we were to look at it thematically with the verses, it presents the observer as part of this. Still the song going through their eyes, and how they feel like a teenage queen, living vicariously through the beauty and purity of the girl. Again, it builds this positive connotation to the song, but when we focus on specific lyrics in the verses and bridge alluding to self-harm, voids, and breaking down, it shows that this positivity and beautiful feeling is just a fleeting one. And specifically, if we look at the final line of the chorus, "The weight of the world won't feel so bad now," it's as if the observer is living vicariously through young lovers in an attempt to distract from the depression and stress of adulthood. It reframes the song into an almost negative standpoint of running from your troubles and trauma to try and experience and stay rooted in that young and pure feeling, instead of facing a harsh reality. The band's work previously focused heavily on themes of overcoming addiction, cheesy horror tropes, and vocalist Will Francis's struggles in life as a teen addict who had been kicked out of his house after dropping out of school during the 8th grade. And that's one of the big reasons Conviction is such a brilliant record. It not only breaks the mold musically and shows maturity in the band's songwriting, but the lyrical content here also breaks new ground. It shows Will's growing talent as a writer and his ability to take dark themes and portray them in a three-dimensional way, keeping that confessional and personal styling he was famous for, but pushing the poetic and complex nature of dichotomy and dissonance and pushing things to a new limit. One of my favorite songs on the record shows this off perfectly.
Demon, your ghost eyes, watching me run through our lives. A soft look and silence, misery come and find us. Well, don't try.
One Love takes on a dichotomy of hopeless romanticism with the imagery of Will's princess dying of a heroin overdose. Yet seeing it as more of a Sleeping Beauty situation, the chorus expands on this, describing the overdose as seeing one love in a girl's eyes only for her to pass away, or in this case, being beyond human aid. When we take a look at the second verse, it takes on a Romeo and Juliet theme, where Will realizes the brevity of the situation and his loss of his lover, yet he still decides to chase the dragon of his addiction in a delusional attempt to romanticize his death so he can join his love in hell. It's a beautifully twisted track that weaponizes romantic and poetic language in order to portray a tragic and awful situation, both allowing it to more easily be digestible, but also give us a glimpse into how an addict in this situation might see it. It takes a dark and twisted image, and rather than try to just purely romanticize it and dress it up to be something beautiful when it's not, it instead uses language to twist it and pervert it even more, giving us this almost delusional feeling when we actually listen to what is being said and what is being described. And that's part of why it's one of the best on the record. Now, like I said before, not every track is as focused on the theme of dichotomy, and the album has a few love songs strewn about it, like the track Moment. And while this song isn't as interesting or complex as many others on the record, it is one that still stands strong as a great track. And plus, what Goth album would be complete without a few love songs on it? Now, the track Son of Lies, on the other hand, is a more direct song, harkening back to the band's roots, but with more of an evolved take on the self-destruction anthems they were known for.
And shine so bright we all go blind. Stay a million words to say and show until we all go home.
The lyrics embrace self-destruction and nihilism, but as negative as they may be, the sound of the music carries a triumphant and powerful tone, pushing the song to be one of the album's best and most well-aged. Despite what some burnt fans or upset critics may have had to say about Conviction, The record does keep a lot of the core DNA of what made Aiden Aiden intact. All it's done is rearrange it and modify it to be something new and interesting. It's not as outwardly heavy, but it is still tonally heavy and lyrically very venomous and viperous. It's good. It's fantastic. But for me and my own personal bias, I think the best and most powerful song in the album is the track Bliss.
And all she knows, and all she knows, all she knows is bliss. So what's killing you? Is it the demon inside?
Bliss is a song about tragedy, where Will sees his mother as a whore, struggling with alcoholism, and once again in these lyrics, the term demon, a reoccurring metaphor on this record, returns yet again. Here, it's used as describing addiction, very similarly to how it appeared in the song One Love. The demon is our vice that possesses us, causing us to crave and use what we are stuck with in order to deal with our respective plights. But when we move to the second verse, the focus on the shame and plight of the female character in the song appears. But due to the life that she's living, it only tears her self-esteem apart and brings added depression, concluding with her ending her own life in the song's bridge. Will takes this, and rather than portraying it in a sympathetic or even a tragic fashion, he sings it in a way that comes across almost in this woe is me victim complex sort of way, seeing himself in this tragedy and his mother's life, and just kind of morphing it into this both really sad yet almost sarcastic sense of anger. I don't know how to describe it. It's just perfect. It lands so well with being in this haunting and dark track, while also playing into the, I don't want to say whimsical, but for lack of a better term, almost whimsical sort of nihilism that really flows through this record. It blurs the line, like I said before, with being this whole sort of nasty, dark, tragic sort of tale with this sense of irony where Will and the band are portraying it in a way to where it never loses that sad and sympathetic nature, but it never tries to make you cry. It never tries to force you into feeling a negative sort of way. Instead, it just kind of gives it to you in this ugly, bubbled up mess. I guess to try and put it in a more coherent fashion, Bliss and the majority of Conviction's lyrics, they remain tragic and dark, but rather than trying to manipulate you and force your emotions into a negative and sad light, they instead portray them in this honest and almost aloof sense, where they know they're dark and twisted, they know they're sad, but rather than being like, please cry for us, it's, feel what you feel. You want to laugh, laugh. You want to be sad, be sad. If you want to feel nothing, but take it or leave it. And it makes the whole record just have so much more honesty to it than most others that would take on similar themes, where they would do everything in their power to try and force you to cry or feel horrible. And that's kind of the case with the entire record. It's constantly blurring the lines musically as well between 80s goth rock and contemporary alternative and post-hardcore, all while its lyrics blend an almost sarcastic flair with a tragic portrayal of addiction, mental illness, young love, or, just depression and self-destructive tendencies. And Bliss is the ultimate example of that. Musically, to me at least, it's a perfect song. And lyrically, I think it's perfect too. It takes every hallmark of the record and really the era that it comes from and combines it into one cohesive piece, with the sarcasm, dramatic flair, edgy and almost too far theming, and grounding it all with a level of relatability that makes it go down easier than you would actually think. Now, from this point, the album admittedly loses a bit of steam with its final track. And yeah, the strongest song on the record is Bliss. So when As the Sky is Falling comes on, it's not bad. It's a decent little end song to tie off the record, and it is a really good track. It just kind of loses the steam built up with Bliss. It just kind of almost muddies the ending. But with that, we would typically end the record, but I'm actually not going to here. Because this is where we have to talk about what I think is the album's true best ending track, but also one reserved as a bonus, specifically for fucking Best Buy. Yeah, this album came out when retail stores like Walmart, Target, and Best Buy would get exclusive tracks on their CDs. Something that may have made sales better back in the day, but is a massive pain in the ass to deal with in the modern era where these CDs are harder to find, and in many cases, these songs don't get put on streaming or online stores. Now, with that being said, the bonus track in question is known as Here Lies the Waste.
Quick, close my eyes, throw me out. No surprise, but I'll wait. I'll fucking wait for you. Here lies the waste. I will suffer.
Here Lies the Waste is very much a sister track to that of Bliss, where Will outwardly admits his own hatred of the situation around him, his perceived hate from others, and how much he resents his life and the things around him, only to constantly end each verse with an assertion of wanting to wait for his partner, or maybe even the mother character from Bliss. The title alone, Here Lies the Waste, indicates that he either sees himself or his life as the waste, and this is consistent with the desperation heard all across this album, and it culminates in this theme of neuroticism and victimhood, all wrapped up with a very heavy and dark theme that we've been immersed in throughout the record. And when you put all these pieces together as one cohesive project, you end up with Conviction, one of the best rock albums of the 2000s.
We did a new album. It came out on the 20th of this month of August, and it's called Conviction. It's kind of a departure for us. It's a little bit of a different style of music, where we kind of feel like we're coming into our own as songwriters and as musicians, and we fully believe in what we do as a band. And with all the people who have supported our band from the very beginning, thank you very much. And we hope that you like the album. It's called Conviction. Pick it up.
Conviction would end up being the black sheep among fans when it was released, with some loving it and many seeing it as the band settling out and getting soft. Now, for the uncultured swine that share that opinion, yeah, if you have no context or understanding of the band's influences and history, then maybe that would be true. But the real factor at play here is they wanted to do more than just the thrash and bash punk rock that they had been doing for years at this point. Most times when bands switch up their sound, it's due to one of two things: wanting to just dig into the mainstream and chase trends, or the members growing tired of doing the same thing they've already done and wanting to expand their horizons. With Aiden, it's clear that the latter was the case, because the lyrical content only got darker and more taboo, and the sound was far from what was commercial rock at the time, especially in 2007. And just like how Rain in Hell was the pivot point for the band to make Conviction, Conviction would end up being the pivot point and the exact moment that you have to study to understand the directions both the band and Will would take in the years moving forward from it. Come 2009, the full original lineup would put out one last hurrah of an album called Knives. It would return to the heavier and more punk rock sound the band was known for, but it did take some of the sounds and a lot of the more poetic lyrical content from Conviction and rework it into something darker, angrier, and a lot more cutting. With the band following up with a few more records later on, with each one having another member jump off, and they weren't terrible, but they weren't great, and these would be the records they would use to end their contract with Victory Records before they went silent into that good night post-2012. With Will Francis getting the band back together, or in this case a bunch of hired guns, to do one final record and tour in 2015, finally bringing a closing turn to the page on the band. And to speak of Will himself, only a year after Conviction would hit shelves, Will would rename himself William Control and start a solo project in 2008. This is the project that would lead him to the infamy he's known for now, and under this pseudonym, he would produce a lot of 80s synth pop, sort of mixed with dark wave music under this pseudonym. And honestly, the William Control project's not bad. Some of the lyrics are pretty cheesy, especially when Will does his whole "I'm a sex god" sort of thing. But they're really fun albums, especially Silentium Amoris, which is my favorite project that he did outside of Aiden. And the William Control project as a whole, to me, is the ultimate proof of Conviction's honesty. Because the entire project is built on 80s new wave and post-punk influences. The only difference here is that instead of the lyrics being dark personal musings or tales of addiction and loss, we get these sexual exploits and serial killer stories of the titular character told across each record. Now, this is the part where we should probably tie things up, because going into William Control, or even talking more in depth about the second half, or even going even deeper into the first half of Aiden's career, are videos well worth their own time, because there's a lot to say and a lot to go over. So, let's just say this. Conviction, as biased as I am, I don't care. Conviction is one of the 2000's best offerings when it comes to the Mall Goth Warped Tour wave. And I know if anyone from the band ever heard someone say that, they'd probably want to puke, but hey, I'm not the one who makes the rules. That was the scene and the era you guys came from. The album is a personal favorite and deeply important record to me. And I just wanted to kind of yap about it, so I hope you enjoyed the history, and I hope that I showed you a hidden gem, because to me, it's one of the best out there. Aiden may be a mostly forgotten name today, but they are one of the most important bands of the 2000s, and they're well worth a listen to anyone who enjoys that era of music. The band embodies much of what made that era what it was, and honestly, without Aiden, alternative music wouldn't be the same without them. Alright boys, get your wallets out, you know what time it is. This is my wall of shame, and the part of the video where we're done, but I'm gonna sit here and congratulate and thank the people who support me, and for those who don't and are thinking about it, I'm gonna beg you to pull that wallet out and hand me some of your hard-earned cash. All jokes aside, if you want to see more videos and support the channel, then you can do so by either becoming a patron or throwing a one-time donation on Ko-fi. Both are much appreciated and do a lot to help out, considering anytime I make a video like this and I'm talking about music and even some media, like the horror cartoons video, for example, wasn't monetized because, I guess Viacom really doesn't want people showing Invader Zim without them getting $1 off of it. Yeah, a lot of stuff I do is demonetized, not as much as it used to since I do more stuff now, but you get the idea. So any support that you want to show, it helps big time. And if you do, you'll get your name up here, you'll get sneak previews of thumbnails, videos, and different stuff like that. You'll get to hear my personal musings on occasion, and hopefully sooner than later I'll be able to get some dedicated Patreon-only videos. Right now there's just an unreleased one on a certain person who might get angry and try and get at me for some of the criticisms about him and his crunkcore band, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no, this video is a labor of love. I've wanted to talk about Aiden for a long time. As I said in the video, they've been one of my favorite bands since I was like 15, so I had to talk about it at some point, and Conviction is just such a masterpiece that someone had to talk about it, and if it's me, then hey, I'm more than happy to do so. But with that being said, more hidden gems to come, more of the weird side, more unsolved mysteries, more video game videos, more of the bullshit that you subscribe for. I've got a lot of stuff coming from all the different things that I already do, and some new, video styles and new topics as well. So look out for that. But with that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh, and join the Discord server.